My name is Steve Melzer. I'm from Midland, Texas, in the heart of the Permian Basin. Some would call it the headquarters city of the Permian Basin. And we have a pretty active basin today. I'm a geological engineer, so I like to kid people that when I'm with engineers, they call themselves a geologist. When I'm with geologists, they call themselves an engineer. So, but my whole career has really been trying to merge the worlds of science and geology with the commerciality and engineering of oil and gas exploration and production. So that's kind of what I do, and more in the last 15 years we've gotten into the subject called residual oil zones.
Residual ozones.
Residual oil zones.
Oil zones, okay.
We call it RPSEA for short, and what it is a more general term for oil that lies beneath the oil-water contact in a reservoir. And historically, that's all been called a transition zone, where you start to get increasingly more water as you get below the oil-water contact. But what we have found in a lot of places in the world that's too narrow a definition. And so we've been trying to understand why for all these years. And I think we got it figured out, but you know, Mother Nature makes us humble, and we'll probably learn some more about them.
Excellent. So why should any consumer environment or environmentalist care about ROZ?
Well,
ROZ?
yeah, you know, in the U.S. and worldwide, one of the things that we've all got to have is energy for life. And oil and gas has been a big part of that, and will continue to be for another 2 decades, 3, 4, 5 decades probably, regardless of the energy source that we come up with in the future. Expansion of wind is a good idea, expansion of solar is a good idea, but the truth is we've got to have oil and gas, and it's the cheapest of all of the sources of energy. So the more we can find, the more we can figure out how to do economically and environmentally friendly ways is the right thing to do. And so our industry is devoted to that, finding it and producing it economically and environmentally friendly. So our work that we've done with RPSEA is exactly in that regard. And what has happened is the residual oil zones are adding a whole nother layer of opportunity for finding that oil and producing it economically. And so that's the goal of our work, was to identify why it's there and determine the amount of resource that's there, and then figure out the commercial avenues to produce it.
How long have you been a part of RPSEA or involved in any way?
Yeah, my first exposure was about a decade ago. I got a call from a Washington attorney talking about a bill that they wanted to get passed in the Energy Policy Act of '05. And it was going to establish RPSEA. And he said, we've got an element within RPSEA that's unconventional, and we've got an element that's part of the small producers program. We'd create a small producer program, and he said, would you be willing to support it? And I said, oh, of course. I said, you know, this is modeled after the Gas Research Institute, or how's it modeled? He said, well, kind of, but it's not going to be funded that way. It's going to be funded by a directed revenue from the offshore oil, or the federal based offshore oil. As I remember, that's what he said. And I said, well, that's great. It's going to be independent? Or is it going to work under DOE, or how's it going to work? And he said, well, we'd prefer that it be independent, but it'll probably be with DOE. And I said, well, it sounds like it'll work. So, and I talked to my congressman about it and a couple others. And anyway, the Energy Policy Act of '05 actually got passed. I think it's maybe the last one that did for a long time. And when it got started, I was pretty excited about it. And I heard a guy named Mike Mean come talk about it at one of the Interstate Oil and Gas Compact Commission meetings. We were in Mobile, Alabama. And I said, man, I think this is going to work. Because he had exactly the right charter, I thought, that he presented. So I was pretty excited when I heard that.
What do you think the top benefits have been over the last 10 years?
I can't really speak to the ultra deep part of the program. I'm not an offshore guy, so I don't really follow that very well. I'm an onshore guy. And I realized in my career that the onshore opportunities have moved from the majors to the smaller independent, or large independents, to the small independents. And so I was very interested in any program that was directed at helping them understand the technologies of producing oil onshore. And so that's what I see RPSEA having done, is recognizing the need for the smaller companies to get exposed to the best and brightest. And they've done a marvelous job at that, onshore, I would say. And you can call the shale revolution in part due to their success. GRI before them, DOE of course had a role in that as well. But what I see is that RPSEA focused on the commercial side of it, and they realized that if they didn't involve the commercial entities, that it probably wouldn't be a successful program. So they were working their tails off trying to get the commercial entities, like, you know, the oil companies involved, service companies and oil companies involved. And you know, it's really hard to lay credit in the world of research. And, you know, this research led to that, and this and led to this. But I think you can point to some things that RPSEA did that are absolutely contributing to the advancing of the industry, because of that commercial influence they've had.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Well, last question. So, worst case scenario, RPSEA goes away.
Right.
And if you were talking to someone who had the pull to bring RPSEA back and help them go forward, what might you say to them?
Well, you know, a RPSEA organization is really the mechanism to collaborate parties into a research program. They're not going to own the technologies they create or the products they create. And so we've got to figure out a way for RPSEA to get the financial footing to keep doing that. And you know, some would argue that we need to, you know, the sponsors of the companies that use the technologies for commercial applications are the ones that do that, but it's really hard to do, especially in an up and down price environment like we always are in, to keep that continuity. And so I would argue that public money is well spent. I just gave a talk, and I was talking about the leverage of our projects that we've done with RPSEA and how much they've contributed to our industry. And so that small investment that keeps RPSEA going and allows them to do that collaborative work between parties is fundamental. You know, whether it comes from the original idea of getting it from a federal, what do they call that, earmark, you know,
Yeah.
or getting it from just a percentage of the royalties that are produced off of offshore or onshore BLM lands or offshore federal lands. You know, it just makes a lot of sense to do it that way. And the problem that I see with the Department of Energy by itself is it's very difficult for somebody in Washington to interact in a daily fashion with the industry that's off in the hinterlands. And I think RPSEA recognized that problem from the get-go, and so Sugar Land was a great place to do that from. It's not perfect, you know, I would love for them to have an office in Midland and Denver and Oklahoma City and Bismarck, North Dakota, and places like that, but at least they recognize that they need to be out. My dad used to joke to me, he said, I wish the Department of the Interior was in the interior. You know, and I think it's that kind of a concept.